So we have this idea that we want to make a little book. And it's great to be able to look out your window or look inside your head and come up with an idea. I was looking out my window this morning and I was watching the rabbits playing in the lawn outside my apartment. So I decided today we would work on trying to figure out what is going on with those bunnies. I have a pan of watercolors. I have a couple of containers of water, and I also have tube watercolors, which I use sometimes. That's what I squirt out here. The tube watercolors sometimes give me a more saturated color than a pan watercolor, but it's really the preference of the artist. Before I start painting, I've got my light drawing to give me an idea of what I'm working on next. And this little fellow is seated at his table, and he's working on his own drawing. I'll dampen him with some clean water. I should say almost clean water. I wanted you to be able to see what I was doing. So I'm dampening it here. I'm not going to work on the table just yet, just his little body. And I don't like it when something is just one color. Bunnies especially are full of color. Birds are full of color. People are full of color. It's more than just a flat image. So I will add just little spots of all kinds of color. You can see how when I drop my brush onto that wet surface, the paint starts to bloom. It just spreads on that wet surface. I'm going to add a little gray. And I love to see where it moves around on the paper. I start out very light at first. The nice thing about watercolor is you can keep going, you can go back in and saturate it a little bit more. The other thing I like about watercolor is that it's quick, it dries quickly, it lets you see what I call the bones of a drawing. I love to see the pencil marks on a watercolor painting. I love to see where some color stopped and another one started, or they flowed together. There's something really magical and beautiful about that. Where I dropped a little bit of that pink paint at first, I got a clean brush with water and I'm moving it around just a little bit. I didn't want it to be too solid all the way through. But you get the idea that now it's starting to take shape. I'm going to use a little bit of blue because often, especially in the summertime, winter too, when you look at shadows, sometimes they're blue in the light. So I'm going to use a tiny bit of blue here and there, like under his arm, behind his leg, on his tail. Okay, there he is. I think some of you might have noticed that I'm really using the very tip of my brush a lot. Think of it like a shoe. That's the toe of the shoe. If you were a dancer, you were dancing point, you'd be on the toe of your shoe. It's where you have control. Where it's attached to the brush, the heel of the shoe, you don't want to bend on that too much. You can lay your brush flat, you can roll it, you can drag it, but don't push hard on it because it just splays it and you'll lose control of your painting. So we've blocked in our little bunny. He's seated at his desk. I think he could really stand to have a pencil. So I'm going to give him, I'm going to block in a little orangey yellow to make a pencil. We're going to set him aside and let it dry a bit before we go back in and do anything else. So, there he is so far, sitting there at his table. While those are drying, I will go to the next page. Again, I dampen just the bunny. He's kind of crouched down, like he's going to pull this thing out. And I think being a little bunny, that carrot might be awfully hard to pull out of the ground, so he's going to have to really get down and dirty to pull this thing out. So we're going to start to see him come to life with this, with a little bit of color. I haven't done very much in the backgrounds on these. I think for right now, I'm really interested in trying to make a decision about my character. What kind of character is he? All I know about him is that it's a little boy bunny. And he's hungry. And I'm trying to figure out how he uses his brain and his muscles to get what he needs. In this case, he's trying to figure out how to get this carrot. Now I'm going to dampen the carrot. I think I got a little too much water. If you ever have too much water on something and you want to try to take some of it off, I love to use Q-tips. They're like a magic eraser for watercolor. There we go. It's a pretty bright colored carrot. And it's still in the ground. So we know this bunny is going to have to work pretty hard at getting the carrot out. I'm using a couple shades of orange so you can see how they blend together on the paper. So I'll let it dry for a bit also. I'm going to set it aside. Now I'm going to grab the drawing I was working on earlier. So here we are with our little guy at his desk. I'm going to add the other leg to the chair, to the little stool. And oh gosh, let's give him a little grass around his desk. So I'm just taking my wet brush with a little bit of light green, and I'm making these gestural drawings with my brush. That way it doesn't look like he's just floating on the page. So you can see two of the pages that are starting to come together in our little book. I think my bunny's face is dry enough that I can go in and give him his little button eye. Make sure my brush isn't too wet. And he's looking very determined. When you think about the direction the face is turned and what your character is doing, think about how everything changes. The angle of his face determines the angle of the eye. If he's curious or in a hurry, think about what happens with his eyebrow. So I'll go in and I'm going to use my pencil, highlight this a little more on the edges. I'm going to give him a little eyebrow because he's off and running. Maybe we should give him, maybe he should be carrying something while he's running. We'll figure that out. And he needs a few whiskers. And this little bunny, his eye is still a little wet, so I'll be careful. I'm going to go back over him as well and give him a little more definition with a pencil where his tail is. Okay, so now we've got 2 pictures of our rabbit. These drawings don't have a particular narrative. I'm just trying to figure out what would go on in the day of the life of this rabbit. So once again, see this watercolor bloom around. And you can see also that I'm not terribly worried about having it stay within every line. I'm just getting a sense of his body. And if you were to look at a bunny body, you wouldn't necessarily see where colors start and stop. It is a little more dry. We can go back in with either a little bit more color, or as I did with those earlier rabbits, use my pencil to give it a little more definition. So if you're working on a story or want to work on a story, there are several ways of approaching it. I'm using watercolor for my character, but if you don't have any watercolor at home, just use a pencil or use different markers. Fold the paper and you can create your own kind of little magazine. And let him dry. But you can see now how, boy, it's still wet. So we're starting to have these different characters, the character in different positions. This is a little dry. Use the fan method here. Try to hurry it up. So if you were doing this with just a marker, you could use a little cross hatching, or if it's with a pencil, you can shade with your pencil or do cross hatching to give it some depth, or maybe it's just a line drawing like a cartoon. I think this is dry enough now. I can put it together a little bit to give you an idea. So here's the outside. My little book is starting to come together. He's off running somewhere. He's pulling a carrot out. Some more pencil drawings. He falls asleep over his book. He's taking off again. He's writing his memoirs, bunny memoirs. When it's all done, you can bind it together with a piece of string. You can put your pages together where they're folded and then tie it with a little ribbon or string so that it's together. Or if you have a big stapler, you can use that. But I think it would be kind of cool if you brought your book to me when the Hot Shops is open again to the public, and I could see the story that you made. I think it's important to be able to write down your ideas and explore how you might make your idea real. It can be fun, it can be thoughtful. Maybe there's something that's been on your mind. It helps you figure it out. Write your questions down. and it gives you something to explore, but mostly just to have some fun and make something real. That's the wonderful thing about getting to come to work here. We get to make all of our ideas real.